together.
Honourable House now resume its sittings. Call of the roll.
Dr. Chang, Mr. Samuda, Mr. Montague, Ms. Grange, Mr. Henry, Mr. Bartlett, Mr. Mackenzie, Mr. Chuck, Mr. Darrell Vaz, Mr. Warmington, Mrs. Robinson, Mr. Hutchinson, Dr. Wheatley, Dr. Tufton, Mrs. Malahoo-Ford, Mr. Spencer, Mrs. Williams, Mr. Green, Mr. Arscott, Mr. Azan, Dr. Bloomfield, Mr. Brown, Dr. Brown-Burke, Mr. Buchanan, Mr. Bunting, Dr. Campbell, not here, Mr. Campbell, Mr. Clark, Mrs. Cuthbert Flynn, Ms. Daly, Mr. Daly, Mrs. Dalrymple Philibert, Mr. Dunn, Mr. Fagan, Dr. Ferguson, Mr. Golding, Dr. Guy, Ms. Hannah, Mr. Hales, Mrs. Holness, Mr. Hilton, Mr. Jackson, Mr. Kellier, Mr. Main, Dr. McNeil, Ms. Nita, Mr. Paulwell, Mr. Michael Phillips, Dr. Phillips, Mr. Pickersgill, Mr. Redmond, Mr. Robertson, Mrs. Holness, Mr. Robinson, Mr. Stewart, Mr. Terrelong, Reverend Thwaites, Mr. Dwayne Vaz, not here, Mr. Wright. Anybody entered in? Mr. Holness. Here.
Statements by ministers.
Mr. Speaker, we'll have statements today from the Minister of National Security, the Prime Minister, and the Minister of Culture, Gender, Sports.
Minister Montague.
Yes, sir. Marshal. Mr. Speaker, thank you very much, sir. Mr. Speaker, no, man. Copies will be on the website, but we have limited printed copies for some persons. Mr. Speaker, there has been lots of debate surrounding the pre-owned motor vehicles policy and procurement of late. Many of the contributors to this debate have formed their conclusions and opinions, but they have not been entirely factual. I seek to provide the facts in order to be transparent and accountable to the Jamaican people. Firstly, as a matter of background, this policy saw its birth by way of a manifesto commitment leading to the 2016 general election. The policy was deliberately designed to get more cars to the police using the same level of resources, bearing in mind that our economy faced constraints and the economy has just started to see the fruits of this sacrifice. With that in mind, Mr. Speaker, we are only 1 3/4 years into our term. At this point, we have secured and delivered pre-owned and new vehicles and repaired and returned to the fleet 114 vehicles, and we bought 160 vehicles. Mr. Speaker, the vehicles we repaired have been lying idle at the garages for as far back as 2012. We are also going through the procurement process for an additional 119 vehicles, which are to be received before Christmas of this year. This government and administration will not breach the GOJ's procurement guidelines. To put this in context, at the end of 2012, the police received an additional 257 cars, and at the end of the second year, 2013, the police were up now to 385 cars. We are at 1 3/4 years in our term, and we have provided 274 vehicles, and by Christmas, we will be up to 393 vehicles. Important to note, Mr. Speaker, is that this figure to date does not include the 66 units which are on the wharf. While we purchase vehicles, we do not allocate vehicles, but we are confident that the Commissioner of Police has been allocating vehicles to stations that are without vehicles, and as more resources become available, he will continue to do so. The House can be assured that the tax issue surrounding the 66 vehicles will soon be resolved. I also want to assure that this minister will not in any way breach the procurement guidelines or any laws governing the country. So the lie being told that the police have gotten fewer vehicles is not true. Mr. Speaker, the procurement of the 274 units that have already been delivered and the 119 to come has not breached any government procurement guidelines and will not breach any. Now allow me, Mr. Speaker, in the interest of transparency, clarity, accountability, and good governance, to share with you and the nation the details of the procurement of the 200 vehicles. Mr. Speaker, please note that the role of the minister is to drive policy. And I am deeply hurt, and I take it as an affront when people carelessly attack the reputation and professionalism of the technocrats at the Ministry of National Security. Now, Mr. Speaker, let me provide you with a timetable of the events. On September 10, 2016, an advertisement appeared in the national press, and a copy is on the screen, for 80 cars and 120 double cab pickups. The offer, Mr. Speaker, was divided into 5 lots in order to give an opportunity to small business owners. This means registered motor car dealers could submit for 1 or more lots, and the breakout of the lots are on the screen. On September 14, the tender document was made available for purchase, and 7 companies bought the package. on October 5. That was the closing date for submission of bids. This, however, was extended to October 12 due to the threat of Hurricane Matthew. On October 12, 2016, in the presence of representatives from the Office of the Contractor General and those who submitted bids, as well as the ministry staff, the tender box was opened. 3 tenders were found: Trivisco Enterprise, O'Brien's International, and Motor One Imports. 1 additional bid that was not placed in the box was rejected and returned unopened because it was not submitted on time and according to the GOJ procurement guidelines. Mr. Speaker, this ministry that I lead will not breach the GOJ procurement guidelines. To be eligible, bidders were required to submit the following: a valid tax compliance certificate, proof of registration with the National Contracts Commission, proof of registration with the Trade Board. These eligibility requirements were satisfied by all 3 bidders. In addition, a bid bond was submitted by all 3, and this was intended to ensure that only serious bidders came to the table. On October 24 and 26, the bids were evaluated by an evaluation committee with representatives from the Constabulary Force and also from the Force's Transport Management and Maintenance Division and from the Citizen Security and Justice Program. The Ministry of National Security provided secretarial support to the evaluation committee. The bids were evaluated on the following criteria: technical specifications, delivery period, warranty, cost, and after-sales service. The tender document indicated that the bidders who attained a minimum of 75 points or more would be considered for the award of contract. On November 9th, the evaluation committee made a submission to the Goods Specialist Sector Committee of the NCC for the award of 2 contracts. Only O'Brien's International and Trivisco Enterprise emerged with scores above the minimum 75. Therefore, the evaluation committee in its final deliberation recommended to the NCC that contracts be awarded to both bidders. The evaluation committee also felt that it would not be in the best interest of the ministry to award all lots to 1 bidder, and this is contained on page 14 of the tender evaluation report, a copy of which is on the screen. Representatives from the Ministry of National Security and the Jamaica Constabulary Force were invited by the National Contracts Commission Goods Specialist Sector Committee on November 18, 2016 to make a presentation. On December 7th, the matter was considered by the NCC. On December 8th, we received a letter from the NCC endorsing the recommendation for award of contract in one instance to O'Brien, and notwithstanding the recommendation by the Ministry's Evaluation Committee, the NCC, after deliberation, recommended that the contract for the supply of the 200 cars be awarded to one supplier. The letter from the NCC is on the screen. Please be reminded, Mr. Speaker, that the NCC is an independent oversight body, and this ministry will always abide by the GOJ procurement guidelines. The winning price by O'Brien's, Mr. Speaker, came out at $1.3 million. The price in the marketplace is for $2.6. On January 6, 2017, a submission was made to Cabinet. On January 16, Cabinet granted approval. On January 25th, a contract was signed between the Ministry and O'Brien's. At that time also, O'Brien's provided a performance bond and an advance payment guarantee bond as per the regulations. This, Mr. Speaker, was to ensure adherence to the contract by the supplier and that the tax dollars of the Jamaican people were always protected. At no time was or will the Jamaican taxpayer be at risk. Any lack of performance will not place the taxpayer at any financial risk. At no time were the people of Jamaica at any risk for financial loss. In May, the first set of 30 vehicles arrived and were delivered on June 2 and June 12, 2017. On July 5th, the supplier wrote to the ministry highlighting challenges and requested a 90-day extension. This, Mr. Speaker, is not unusual, and the records will show that an extension to a supplier is not unusual. In July, another set of 31 vehicles, which form the basis of the 66 that have now accumulated, started to arrive. On August 25th, O'Brien's wrote a letter requesting that the GCT and SCT charged on the vehicles be paid by the ministry. At this point, the ministry said no and informed him to comply with the terms of the contract. However, the ministry got advised to look again at clause 16.3 of the contract. And clause 16.3 reads, if any tax exemptions, reductions, allowances, or privileges may be available to the supplier in the procuring entity's country, the procuring entity shall use its best efforts to enable the supplier to benefit from any such tax saving to the maximum allowable extent. With this in mind, Mr. Speaker, the ministry did its due diligence in honoring the contract. This was in anticipation of the matter going to court. We wanted to dot every I and cross every T. However, on October 27th, the ministry wrote a letter to the Ministry of Finance and the Public Service requesting that the taxes on the vehicles be waived in accordance with clause 16.3. On November the 2nd, as expected, the Ministry of Finance and the Public Service advised that the request was not supported. Mr. Speaker, please note that even with the addition of the GCT and the SCT of an average of 230,000, the price would still be the lowest in the tender. And with the market price being 2.6, it is still value for money. On November 15, the Ministry of National Security wrote to O'Brien's and demanded that the vehicles be delivered no later than November 24, 2017. On November 23, the day before the vehicles were to be delivered as demanded by the ministry, the Parliament of the land summoned the ministry to appear before the Public Administration and Appropriations Committee, the PAAC. The ministry then decided to cease all actions pertaining to this contract pending the appearance before the PAAC. This was to prevent an accusation of the ministry trying to undermine the work of the Parliament. The ministry officers appeared on November 29th. On November 30, the ministry wrote to the Solicitor General. On December, Mr. Speaker, on December 1, 2017, the Ministry of National Security sent a letter calling the performance bond of $42.7 million. From the opening day of this contract, As per the GOJ procurement rules, the Office of the Contractor General has been kept abreast of all activities pertaining to this contract in a timely manner, and up to yesterday, the Permanent Secretary had dialogue with the Office of the Contractor General. I have in my possession an exchange of letters between the OCG and the Ministry over the period, providing updates. Look at the screen, youngster. Let it be known. I will provide you with copies if you so desire and request, Honourable Member. Let it be known that this minister will not breach any of the GOJ's procurement guidelines. Mr. Speaker, in summary, the policy as committed to the Jamaican public will continue. The issue surrounding the 66 cars is getting priority attention. The police are more mobile than they were in previous years. The procurement process will continue. The procurement process will continue to be observed and adhered to. And the public of Jamaica will never be at a financial disadvantage as a result of this matter. Mr. Speaker, Chapter 3 of the Jamaican Constitution, better known as the Charter of Rights, clearly states that nobody must be discriminated against because of color, creed, religion, or political affiliation. To hear some people criticize O'Brien's because of a perceived association with a political party, despite the fact that the company met all requirements, it is against our Constitution and it is simply just wrong. Is it a crime? Is it a crime for a supporter of the PNP or the JLP to get a government contract for which they would have qualified? There has been an... Mr. Speaker, there has been an upsurge in murders, and some believe that being a minister, it desensitizes you. A murder, Mr. Speaker, is a loss of a loved one for someone. And I am not desensitized. My family, the community where I am from, the church I attend, has caused me to hurt every time someone is murdered. A murder is a removal of a Jamaican. A murder is a loss to a family. A murder is a loss to our community. The pain of every murder must be felt by every Jamaican, and that is why we cannot, must not, and should not politicize crime. I believe with the strength of my body, the thought of my mind, that if both major political parties work together, we can overcome any challenge that faces this nation. Crime, Mr. Speaker, is one such challenge. Crime is costing this country 5% of our GDP, approximately $68 billion per year. Criminals, Mr. Speaker, have organized and networked. Good, decent, law-abiding citizens must do the same. Of that, I am convinced. Of that philosophy, I fervently believe. It is based on this, sir, that when appointed as Minister of National Security, I made strenuous efforts and met with the former minister. On June 16, 2016, I wrote to the General Secretaries of the PNP and the Jamaica Labour Party, because both political parties have the best intelligence network across this island. The General Secretary of the PNP did not respond until November 2016 to say due to the pending nominations for local government elections, they were unable to meet, but would meet thereafter. That meeting, sir, took place in February 2017 with the then party chairman, the Honourable Robert Pickersgill, and the now General Secretary, Julian Robinson. Mr. Speaker, the General Secretary of the Jamaica Labour Party arranged a meeting of all councillors and caretakers on July 27, 2017. I then wrote to the General Secretary of the PNP on the 26th of July, having not heard from them or seeing a meeting convened. On August 9, I placed a call to the General Secretary of the PNP, who assured me that the meeting would be convened after his party's general conference in September. To date, I am still awaiting that call. I again make a public appeal to the President of the PNP, a man who occupied the office of National Security and understands the pressures. I am asking him respectfully to use his best efforts to convene this meeting and to partner with us in the fight against the criminal elements that threaten to derail the prosperity of this country. Mr. Speaker, I hear you all the while and your spokesperson saying you want to sit down. I want to assure the country, every citizen, you said that because of a lack of cars, crime go up. I want to assure the country, every citizen, that we have invested heavily in the fight against crime. We have requested and received an additional $2.5 billion in budgetary support. We have invested heavily into the intelligence network. We have expanded the training capacity of the police force. We are going to be employing an additional 3,000 extra police officers to put on the streets. We are repairing 160 police stations this year. We are investing in technology and expanding its use. The Jamaica Eye app, which is CCTV, the RQ code for the foot and beat patrols. Mr. Speaker, these are but some of the initiatives we have undertaken. But, Mr. Speaker, crime cannot be solved overnight, because there is no quick fix, there is no switch, and the Jamaican people knows and appreciates this, and they have partnered with us, and together we are seeing positive results. Mr. Speaker, murders and shootings are up over last year, but these are but 2 of the 7 categories that are used to measure crime. Break-ins are down by 10%. Aggravated assault is down by 11%. Robbery is down by 15%. And although rape is up in 3 divisions, it is down nationally by 15%, and larceny is down by 28%. Positive signs, Mr. Speaker. And we are just beginning. We have put up $1 million for each of the country's most wanted fugitives. We have put up $100 million for information on illegal guns and ammunition. Mr. Speaker, I ask all of us to encourage our people to call Crime Stop with information. For all of 2016, we seized 591 illegal weapons. And to date, for this year, we have seized 820 illegal guns, up 38%. Mr. Speaker, last year we seized 7,876 rounds of illegal ammunition. To date, we have seized 21,493, a 272% increase. We are making progress, but more needs to be done. We know that. We understand that. And that is why we keep asking that the Honourable House vote more funds to fight crime. This is not a security forces fight only, sir. This is not a minister's fight only. This is not a government fight only. What is required is an all-of-society response from all of us, from every single Jamaican in every single community. Mr. Speaker, we must work together. We must not politicize national security. This government is investing in national security. We must unite as a nation to fight crime and criminal elements. And those of us who offer comfort, we must fight them, Mr. Speaker, so that Jamaica may, under God, increase in beauty, fellowship, and prosperity. if it so pleases you, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Bunting.
Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker. Turn on this mic. Mr. Speaker, in the absence of the opposition spokesman on national security, I am the member designated under Standing Order 11A2 to respond to the Minister's statement. You heard that, Mr. Speaker?
Go ahead, Mr. Bunting.
Go ahead. Thank you. Minister, Mr. Speaker, I had really expected... The mic isn't working? It's low. I had really... I had really anticipated that the minister would have come here with a humble and contrite heart this afternoon. Instead, he has taken the approach that the member from Northwest St. Catherine would describe as wrong and strong. Mr. Speaker, the policy to import used vehicles for the JCF was ill-conceived and not supported by any proper analysis. The outcome was very predictable. The minister could not find another police service in the entire world that took such an approach. He originally justified it on the basis that for the price of one new car, he would get 4 used cars. But it turned out by the time he actually started purchasing, he was getting just 1.25 used car for the price of a new car. And bear in mind that the used car, the used Axios, has no manufacturer's warranty, smaller engine, weaker suspension, cramped interior when compared to the new Corolla. Mr. Speaker, any prudent administration would make sure that a supplier to the police should be subject to a thorough due diligence. And this due diligence should be both from the fit and proper perspective, as well as to determine their financial and technical capability to deliver the equipment. The minister could not vouch for the principles of O'Brien's International Car Sales and Rental when I asked him the question if he was satisfied that they were fit and proper. However, based on his choice of a murder accused and subsequently convicted person to be the motivational speaker for the JCF's blast-off in January, he obviously uses a contrarian set of principles in exercising his judgment. The truth is, Mr. Speaker, I pointed out many months ago that from a financial and technical standpoint, O'Brien's had only been importing 1 or 2 cars per month when that company received the contract for 200 vehicles to be delivered within 90 days. I want to move now to the tender process, Mr. Speaker. First of all, the whole concept was flawed. You were asking people to tender on a speculative basis. They did not have the cars. They did not have pictures of these vehicles. It was sight unseen. And yet they were promising to deliver hundreds of vehicles within a very short period of time. There was nothing for the police to inspect to see the quality of the vehicle. assist. There was nothing to examine from a quality point of view. Was price. The lowest price, and therefore guaranteed the vehicles in the worst condition was going to win the tender. And we're seeing that playing out today. Further, Mr. Speaker, to allow key specifications of the tender to be varied after the award of the contract makes a mockery of the whole procurement exercise. In this case, we have seen where there was a mandatory specification of no CVT transmission, no continuously variable transmission. This, in practice, has been ignored as all the Axios delivered to date have these CVT transmissions. The specs of the tender said it was to be delivered within 90 days. That 90 days 300 days and still only 30. May have had a CT. This is said at the PAAC, the information. Well, all right, let us say a moratorium. Had this been front, had a much better opportunity to prepare a more competitive all these things. This has been a flawed and corrupt murdered so far. Over 1,600 murders by year. Far the worst year since 2010. And Minister, shooting. Murder and shooting. Though add insult to injury to the families who are suffering from the violence. Families who are suffering. But Mr. Speaker, if we assume that vehicles make the police more effective, criminal activity, thereby minimizing casualties, policy and bungled in any self-respect have been held accountable. It is an own goal. Time, money, and life Jamaican people. And so, Mr. Speaker, that's my statement.
Prime Minister. Oh, sorry.
First of all, Minister, could you just elaborate? You say that 2 days that the what that means and what is the effect of it on the contract as the contract stands now?
Mr. Speaker,
Dr. turn off the microphone.
the performance bond is 10% of the value of the contract. As per contract, to be called if the supplier does not perform as to the stipulations of the contract. And the supplier has not, and it has been called.
Therefore, has the contract been terminated?
No, sir, because there is the advance payment guarantee, and that issue is still there, and we do have that bond as well.
So, is this a matter that you expect to go to court on?
Mr. Speaker, I was very clear in my statement that we do expect the matter to end in court, and that is why we have been dotting each I and crossing every T. And I also clearly said that we have written to the Solicitor General for advice.
But there would be two things that I would ask. Number one, if that is the case, why would you then, if the contract has not been fulfilled, why has the contract not been terminated? And second, the Ministry of National Security had a meeting to discuss the treatment of the SCT and the GCT, which has been the cause of concern because the dealer has indicated that he could not pay that. But the Ministry of National Security had indicated that, having had an internal meeting, they came to the solution, the conclusion that this was not, that the contract stated that it should be paid by the dealer. A letter was sent to the Ministry of Finance, and the Ministry of Finance said the same thing and indicated that there should be a call on the performance bond. The PAC was informed on the morning of the meeting that the permanent secretary on the way down had been told that a letter had been sent out, or that they were being instructed to pay the GCT and SCT. Could you indicate, if that is so, who gave the letter and what occasioned the change of heart, having had the Ministry of National Security and the Ministry of Finance both saying legally that they were not liable? Why was it that that change of heart happened on the day of the PAC meeting?
Mr. Speaker, acting on legal advice, and I said it before in my statement, I was very clear, that we anticipated that this matter would end up in court. And based on the advice, and we looked at clause 16.3, which clearly says that the procuring entity ought to do, in summary, ought to do all that it can to facilitate the supplier with any waiver or tax break. So we did what we did it, and we anticipated that the ministry would have said no, and I said it in my statement. We wrote to the Solicitor General, and then, after that, we called the performance bond, because I am not an attorney, and I am moving on the basis of the advice received.
With due respect, Minister, you have not answered the question. The question was, on that a letter or custom seems to have been notified that a moratorium would be put on the payment of the SCT and GCT, and that to allow for the clearance of the vehicles. It was based on that information that the permanent secretary was asked to write to the Attorney General to find out the legal standing, and was informed by the committee not to proceed on it until he got advice, because it would have put the government in a position, adverse position. So the question I'm asking you is, when the moratorium was given, who gave the moratorium, and what was the basis of that moratorium, if the Ministry of National Security and the Ministry of Finance in writing had both stated their position that the GCT and the SCT were not liable by the government of Jamaica? Where was and how, what informed the change of heart that gave that letter?
Mr. Speaker, again, let me repeat. We took legal advice. We are confident that the terms of the contract stated very clearly that the supplier is to pay all applicable taxes and fees and duties. However, Mr. Speaker, we wrote, as I said, to the Ministry of Finance because we did not want to be caught in court and a defense lawyer to say you did not make any effort under Clause 16.3. Further, having called the performance bond, we now have $42 million for the supplier. And we are in discussion, and that is why I clearly said in the statement, please, a question has been asked, allow me to answer. Please. We are to give clarity on the issue. And the advice, we are taking the advice, we have called the bond. We now have $42.7 million, the supplier's money. We have an option. Well, no, there are two separate bonds. There is another bond for $213 million, and that is the advance payment guarantee bond. And there is a second bond of a performance bond. Having not performed to the terms of the contract, we have called that bond. The advance payment guarantee bond has not been called at this point. Based on advice, sir, legal advice.
Mr. Minister, the letter or the information from the letter for the moratorium indicated that by, I think it was March of next year or May, there was a period of time that the Ministry of National Security was then going to have to pay. If things had not been resolved, the Ministry of National Security would be liable and would pay forthwith to the Ministry of National to finance the outstanding SCT and GCT. Is that so? And secondly, what now happens to the vehicles having had moratorium performance bond? Is there any communication to say what is going to happen?
Mr. Speaker, I am very happy that the member has asked the question, what will happen to the vehicles? There are many options. The vehicles are on the wharf. The police need the vehicles. We have $42 million for the supplier. There is one option. We can use that money to pay the bond. It wouldn't be the taxpayer's money. It would be the supplier's money. And he's responsible. He's responsible to pay the duties anyhow. And therefore, we have enough funds from the supplier in calling the bond to do that. But again, Mr. Speaker, we are taking legal advice because you can well appreciate that this matter has certain legal twists and turns. And when you call a bond or terminate a contract, persons have the option of going to court, and we want to be on firm and solid legal grounds.
Mr. Minister, the last thing I would say, Mr. Minister, the last thing I would say, that this still remains a very, very messy affair. And the truth of the matter is that you, in your run-up earlier on, were talking about who should get contracts and who should not, etc. And I think that you may have just lost what is really important to everybody in this parliament. That a year and a half later, we're still waiting on the 200 vehicles. And it is an important tool in our fight against national security. And the entire country is really trying to figure out how we're going to resolve this problem. And it is not easy without those vehicles. Thank you.
Mr. Speaker, I will say to the member and to the other ministers that yes, we are also interested from the ministry how to treat with the 66 cars, because we want them in the system. And hold on, sir. Hold on, sir. I will concede, member, I will concede that I cannot provide all the answers that you need, but I will commit to providing the answers to you, because I have been advised legally, and I cannot provide everything to you, but I will say to you that the police need the 66 vehicles. We are doing everything, I said it in my statement, to ensure that those vehicles are brought into the police fleet at the earliest possible time without additional cost to the taxpayers. I clearly said earlier that the price for the vehicles, 1.3. The price in the marketplace is 2.6. And therefore, some persons are of the view that we were to cancel the contract. If we were to cancel the contract, it would cost the taxpayers an additional 1.3 if we were to buy the cars on the open market. The 66 cars are on the wharf. We have the bond. And, Mr. Speaker, I commit to the member that I will provide you with the necessary information as soon as I can. Because I know today is not the end of the matter. And I will continue to update you and the House and the nation.
Mr. Speaker, if you allow me.
Mr. Phillips.
Minister, the first 30 vehicles that were brought in by the supplier, that was provided or delivered to the Ministry of National Security, was there a moratorium letter given for those vehicles before it was taken off the wharf, or who committed to paying the duties for those vehicles when they were taken off of the wharf? And two, the moratorium letter that was issued by the Ministry of Finance for some $34 million, is that to take into taking the SCT and GCT for all the 200 vehicles that is in the contract? And the vehicles that are currently on the wharf would bring the total delivery to about 96 vehicles out of the 200. The bond that you have, the advance payment bond, is for half of the contract sum. Is it that you're continuing with the contract for the supplier to supply the other 100 plus vehicles, which, in his word on a radio program, has not been delivered? If not, then what happens to the other 100 vehicles?
Mr. Speaker, in answering the member again, the guarantee performance bond is for $213 million, which was advanced to the supplier. The supplier, once we clear the 66 units, would have correctly supplied 96 units. The other 104 is at issue. But again, Mr. Speaker, we are very sure at the ministry that we're going to end up in court. And I don't want to make a pronouncement on the extra 104 units at this time. But I will say that the $213 million advanced to the supplier is covered by the guaranteed payment bond. And we at any time can call that bond.
But you have not answered the question about the first 30 vehicles.
Yes, there was a moratorium, but the ministry has not paid 1 cent. We have not paid any money to the customs. The Ministry of National Security has not paid any money to the customs.
So, but Minister, the current letter that was issued by, or the last moratorium letter that was issued by the Ministry of Finance, that covers how many vehicles?
That would be for the total amount of vehicles, the $34 million. But the Ministry of National Security, I want to be very clear, we are still holding to the view that it is the supplier who is to pay. Now, having called the bond for $42 million, the contract, we can now pay his money to customs. And that is why I am being very cautious, because it's a commercial matter. I am very confident somehow it is going to end up in court. So, but we don't want to go to court and lose.
You can't lose.
But Minister, I'm a little bit confused, because the first 30 vehicles, they were taken off of the wharf, no SCT, no GCT paid. Right? It's the first 30 vehicles. But you're saying that the last letter from the Ministry of Finance took care of the total amount of vehicles. So how did those 30 vehicles come off of the wharf without a moratorium letter being given at that point in time? And who would have been, who would be liable for it? Would it have been the Ministry of National Security? Hence why the supplier is of the notion that the Ministry of National Security would have been paying the SCT and GCT?
No, Mr. Speaker, again, remember, the supplier is responsible for the payment of all duties, fees, and taxes. The supplier is responsible. Hold on, no, please. At the time, there was an outcry and an upsurge, and it was felt that we need to move the vehicles to make our police officers mobile as quickly as possible, and we did so, fully well understanding that we have a performance bond of $42 million from a registered financial entity, irrevocable, that we can call at any time to cover it, and we have the funds in hand. And when you calculate the total GCT and SCT, the $42 million can pay the $34 million and still leave change. At no time was the taxpayers of Jamaica at risk for any financial loss.
Then Minister, the crime situation then is even worse now, right? And so I'm trying to ascertain if it was the Ministry of National Security that gave that guarantee to the customs, because it would really be a breach of the Customs Act itself for the vehicles to come off, not knowing who is going to pay for the duty. And it would also be a breach that moratorium letter would come way after, months after those vehicles would have been taken off, right? So I'm trying to ascertain who it is that gave that moratorium letter for the first 30 vehicles. And I'm still unclear in that.
Member, A moratorium letter was issued for the first set.
By whom? By whom? That's what I'm asking. No, that letter came the 23rd of November.
2 letters.
But that is what I'm asking. That is what I'm asking.
Order, please. Yeah.
But, Mr. Speaker.
Minister, you're answering a question. Proceed.
Hold on.
Mr. Minister, you're answering a question from Mr. Phillips. Have you completed? Order, please.
Hold on.
Mr. Montague, have you completed your answer to Mr. Phillips? Will you proceed? Mr. Phillips, could you turn your light off? Turn your mic off.
No, Mr. Speaker. With all due respect, Mr. Speaker. If a moratorium letter was given, the last one given by the Minister of Finance, states, as in the Minister's word, cover all 200 vehicles. Yes. The question that I'm asking is the first 30 vehicles, if a moratorium letter was issued for that, if not by the Minister of Finance, by whom? Because those vehicles were taken off of the wharf without any SCT or GCT paid. Right? The Minister is still not, I'm still unclear on if a letter was issued by the Ministry of Finance or was it a the Minister can tell you that no, because you and I know that no letter was issued by the Ministry of Finance.
No, rubbish. No,
you can't tell me rubbish.
Mr. Speaker, could
you
can't
tell me rubbish, man.
Could you ask the member to withdraw that? Could you ask the member to withdraw that? That no letter was issued.
Mr. Speaker, I will only withdraw it if he can produce that letter to me now.
I'm asking you to turn your mic off so that...
Mr. Speaker, I'm going to ask you to have the member withdraw that assertion. Or, Mr. Speaker, he comes with proof.
Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, yes, exactly. Because it would, I wouldn't see why the Minister of Finance would issue a moratorium letter to deal with the first set, when one would have already been issued for the first set. So until it can be proven, I will not. But no, Mr. Speaker, through you to the Minister.
What is called declaration? You must account.
As was stated.
Mr. Daly,
as was stated by the Permanent Secretary at the PAAC meeting, when she met with, or when the team from the Ministry of National Security met with the supplier, that when the issue of the SCT and the GCT came up, in her words, that he said that he inadvertently left off the SCT and the GCT off of his price for the tender. If at that point in time, Minister, that was recognized, why then would the Ministry of National Security then go to the Ministry of Finance to ask for a waiver when the price, the SCT and the GCT should have been included in the price that he tendered? Why did the ministry then go to the Ministry of Finance then, and why wouldn't at that point in time the ministry realize that there would have been a problem in getting not only the vehicles that were there on the wharf, but the additional 100 vehicles, that would have 104 vehicles that would have been due to complete the contract.
Mr. Speaker, again, let me try again to clear the air. It is our view that all duties, fees, and taxes must be paid by the supplier. It is our view. The supplier disputed that because he claimed, which is his business, not mine, that his accountant made an error, and we are not paying for his accountant's error. The contract says all applicable duties, fees. That is correct, and that is why, Mr. Speaker, the vehicles have been here from May. The vehicles have been here from May. And if we had intended to pay, we had more than time.
Mr. Tweed.
We can't pay and breach a contract.
A simple question for the Minister. If the vehicles have been here since May, and if the police are so much in need of mobility, as we all agree, if the money for the vehicles has been paid, and now the applicable duties have been placed on moratorium, why are the vehicles on the wharf, sir? Why are they not in the hands of the police, please?
Mr. Speaker, we could not breach a contract, a valid contract. The ministry could not deliberately breach a valid contract. I said in my statement that the issue with the 66 vehicles is getting priority attention. We now have $42 million in hand. And when we take out the duties and the fees out of it, the vehicles will still cost less than market price. We can now pay it because our position has always been that the duties must be paid by the supplier.
Mr. Speaker, at what stage, Minister?
Mr. Phillips, I'm having a difficulty. Let me share it with you. Mr. Daly. Mr. Horace Daly, you are disrupting the House, and I do not wish to advise you again. Thank you very much. Mr. Phillips, statement by ministers is set out in the standing orders. If you have a number of statements, will you put them and let the minister answer them? Minister Montague,
Mr. Speaker,
will you await the questions from Mr. Phillips?
Mr. Speaker,
and then you answer. If after you answer he needs further clarification, we do that. We will not be here until 5 o'clock taking questions one by one.
Mr. Speaker,
the standing orders, if it's read by members,
Mr. Speaker,
tell you how we ask questions by statement by
Mr. Speaker, if you have the member,
Mr. Phillips, don't argue with me.
No, but Mr. Speaker, with all respect, I'm not. But there have been questions made in this House from October on these particular questions on this issue. And because of your laxing, Mr. Speaker, you have not insisted on the minister to answer the questions. That's why we're here now, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Phillips, have a seat, please. Mr. Phillips, please have a seat.
Speaker, this is an issue of national importance.
Please have a seat and let me address you.
Can be criticized too.
Mr. Phillips, you are permitted in this House to ask the questions to the minister. What I am saying, if you have a number of questions, will you put them, and after the minister answer them, if you need further clarification, you do so. To do them one by one-on-one, we are having some difficulties. The statement by Minister set out in the standing orders, I'm going to ask you to look at them. I am not attempting to stop you from asking questions. Will you now proceed and ask the Minister the questions, and the Minister will answer them?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My final question, Mr. Speaker. I just wanted to know, Minister, at what time within the contract that the technical specifications of the vehicles was changed? As it is in your technical specification that you supplied to us on this side, where it says no CVT transmission, and that is mandatory, and the vehicles that have been delivered has CVTs on it. And if at the point when you decided that you are going to change the specification, why, or the technical team at the ministry, why didn't it then go out back to tender that the other persons that were interested would have gotten the opportunity to tender them? Why?
Minister Montague.
Mr. Speaker, I will have to do some research and get back to the Minister.
Mr. Montague, I would like you to advise the House, not that you have to research. The member has some questions. If you are not in a position to answer them now, you need to advise him as to how you will, when you will answer them.
Mr. Speaker, let me thank you for your guidance and wisdom. And Mr. Speaker, I will advise the House that I am not in a position at this time to answer the question, and therefore I will endeavor to research the matter and come back and answer the questions fulsomely.
Mr. Daly.
I really believe that you should have come here this afternoon and just apologize to the country for something that has gone bad. For something that has gone bad. But the question, and look, you know, penitent, it has gone bad. You yourself accept it. It has gone bad. Okay? I have no personal interest, but it has gone bad. The 65 vehicles, 66 vehicles on the wharf now. Can you give us a breakdown of the types of vehicles? Do you have it? If you don't, we'll understand. And are they in the name of the company that is supposed to supply the vehicles to the police? All of them under the contract. Are they in the name of the company?
Again, Mr. Speaker, I will endeavor to do the research and provide the member with the answers he requires.
Minister Grange.
Mr. Speaker, the Minister in his statement has referenced a request to meet with councillors of the People's National Party. Let me state, when I became General Secretary in December, the then party chairman, the member from Northwest St. Catherine, and I met with the minister and his team at his ministry for about 3 hours. We had an extensive meeting. We had a meeting in February of 2017. We had, when he went through his 5-point, all the things, extensive. The minister requested a meeting with all councillors and caretakers island-wide. I verbally indicated to the minister, that there's no one meeting point that councillors island-wide and caretakers come together. That request was made over the summer. I told him we would attempt to have that meeting when we reconvene in September. We went into conference and the by-elections, right? I'm explaining it because, quite frankly, it is an irrelevance. He's putting this information there. I don't know what turns on it. It has no relevance to the procurement of the cars, the failure of the policy, which has led to Jamaicans being murdered. But he has repeatedly raised this issue, and I want the country to know we have met with him, and we are willing to meet with him. But nothing turns on that, and it's an attempt at obfuscation.
Mr. Speaker, I am in shock that nothing turns on a meeting between two major political parties. Mr. Speaker, we met in February with the chairman and the general secretary. I wrote a letter in July. Then followed up with a call in August. And I am happy, Mr. Speaker, that the general secretary has now agreed. He has now agreed to convene that meeting. They have always said they want to partner and work, and we must sit down with them. We want to sit down with you.
Dr. Kemp.
Mr. Speaker, I would, in answer to the member from North Clarendon, the minister said he couldn't assure the House now that all the 66 vehicles were actually belonging to the supplier with whom the contract exists. Earlier, he had said that these vehicles would be cleared forthwith and given to the police. I am not understanding, Mr. Speaker, and would be
asked... Point of order, sir. A point of order, Mr. Speaker. Point of order. I said that the issue with the 66 vehicles is receiving priority attention. I never said we're going to clear them forthwith and give them to the police. I am very careful with my language. Very careful.
Mr. Speaker, I had the impression, on the basis of the minister's statement, that in fact he considered the 66 cars at the Parliament to be part of the contract assignment. How can he then say to the House at the same time that he cannot assure us that those vehicles belong to O'Brien Sales with whom the contract was made? I'm trying to understand the discrepancy. The Minister, clarify for me.
Mr. Speaker, again I will say to the member that the 66 cars that are on the wharf, where the payment of GCT and SCT is involved, it is receiving the full attention of the ministry at this time to get them off the wharf, to get them into the hands of the police, to get them into the various communities at the shortest possible time.
Is the minister saying then that those vehicles all were imported by O'Brien Sales, the supplier with whom the Ministry of National Security has entered into a contract? Are you saying that that is so?
Mr. Speaker, I am not a director of O'Brien's, and the ministry is not the only client of O'Brien's. So I don't know if on the wharf O'Brien's have other cars that belong to other people. I am... Oh, wait. Please. Mr. Speaker, the 66 cars that are on the wharf is receiving the full attention of the ministry to treat with whatever issues surround them so that we can get them into the hands of the police in the shortest possible time.
I can only infer that the minister is not saying that those vehicles belong to O'Brien. He's not clear on the matter. And that, Mr. Speaker, exemplifies the whole confusion surrounding this matter. Mr. Speaker, can you tell me, in light of the needs of the police for vehicles, the fact that the contract has not been performed,
the fact that there is no clarity at this time as to when the other 100 and plus vehicles will come, why is the government of Jamaica not moving now to rescind that contract, move to reputable suppliers, and stop the bloodletting that is resulting in the country because of the lack of police mobility? Why is the government not moving now to do that?
Mr. Speaker, as I have said before and over again, we await legal advice, and we are not going to be rushed, and we're not going to breach the contract. We're not going to breach the contract, but we are moving with haste to treat with the 66 units.
Dr. Campbell.
Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, is it true that the first evidence of non-performance was in June of this year, which was the deadline in the contract?
Again, in my statement, I was very clear that the supplier asked for an extension and the ministry accommodated that extension.
So the extension was given for how long? Just repeat for me, please.
Mr. Speaker, as you had suggested to the members, could the member ask all his questions so that we can answer them all at once?
Well, my question is this. There was an extension given in June to allow for performance. If it was the case that the transmissions were not up to the specifications in the contract, and that was reported in the PAAC. If the other vehicles were not being delivered in time to allow, because it wasn't 30 vehicles that were needed in 90 days, it was the entire set of vehicles. Why, given all these serial acts of breach, acts of non-performance, why was the legal advice not sought from as far back as June, especially in the face of the rising murder rates and the lack of police mobility? Why was it not sought then? I hear the minister concerned about legal action going to be taken. Where is this concern about the murders that are taking place? Who is going to defend the Jamaican people in the face of this? Take the action and let them take it to court if that is what you are concerned about.
Are you quite finished, member? Okay, sir. Mr. Speaker, I hear the honourable member. And again, let me assure the member that based on legal advice, based on the cost that is out there, the matter, Mr. Speaker, of the 66 vehicles is receiving priority attention. We have called the performance bond, and we are proceeding to sort out the issues surrounding the 66 units to get them into the hands of the JCF as quickly as possible.
Dr. Campbell. Use your mic, Dr. Campbell.
I am, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I somehow believe that the portfolio of national security is one that should be taken as a serious portfolio and one that should...
The people are able to ask you. going to
one that
ask
should
members
be taken as a serious portfolio.
ask a question to the minister
I'm
concerning
going
the
to ask the
presentation.
question.
All right, Dr. Campbell.
And I somehow get the impression that the necessary attention and seriousness that should be given to the portfolio is not taking place. One go clean up retirement dump. Now, Mr. Speaker, if we are of the opinion that a vehicle is a force multiplier, if we are of the opinion that the police would be better able to respond to crime, or even the fear of crime, that they would be better able to do so if they have a vehicle, then I think that greater care needs to be taken. Now, in January, it's a simple question. How many more persons will have to die before we take the 66 vehicles off the wharf and put them into the hands of the police so they can respond to crime? Desmond, shut up.
Dr. Campbell.
Shut up. Shut up. Look here. Be quiet.
Dr. Campbell, will you proceed to
Mr.
ask...
Speaker, I want you to tell him to be quiet.
1 minute. It states clearly in the standing order. I'm going to ask members to carry.
I'm not sitting down. You can't.
That you're going to ask a question for clarification. Will you address your question to the minister and do not concern yourself with members. Address the question to the member.
You listening to anybody? Look here. Mr. Speaker, the truth be told, there was a break-in in Discovery Bay, in the very scheme that I live. And when the police were called, they could not respond. Eventually, when they responded with a vehicle that they had seized from somebody that was just in the yard at the police station. My God. The vehicle, and I have the videos of it, the vehicle can be started by any key that you put into it and turn it over. It is in absolutely no condition at all for them to respond to any incidents. And I am saying that if this is the case, we need to ensure that the decisions that are taken to protect, because those who are talking now over there, they and their relatives might very well be the next victim. They and their relatives might very well be the next victim that is in need of the police responding, and they are unable to do so because they don't have a vehicle. I'm saying, if you have paid for vehicles, if you have given a moratorium to say that they have until May 2018 to pay the taxes, why are we not taking off the 66 vehicles and putting them in the hands of the police so the people of Discovery Bay and elsewhere can have police responding to their issues whenever they are called upon?
Members, I'm going to ask you to, if you have questions. Standing order does not permit you to be getting up and give a statement at this time. Statement was given by the relevant minister. Member of a question, please pose your question relevant to the minister's statement.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, it's relevant.
Members, I'm going to ask you, do not get up to give a statement. Ask a relevant question to the minister based on his presentation.
Okay.
I'm going to ask you, please stand by that. Don't allow me to try to stop you. Go ahead.
Okay, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Minister, in regards to your statement on this serious matter of crime that we're dealing with, do you have any data to suggest, because I recall clearly from your statement in your budget presentation, do you have any data to suggest the correlation between the presence of vehicle and crime? And it's a very simple question. And the second part to my question is because there's 4 police stations in my constituency that has no vehicle. And I have here in my hand an invoice and a letter from the police just asking the Member of Parliament for $14,000 so that they could get a vehicle operational. The second part to my question would be then, having answered the first question, how then would you say that this non-performance on this contract has impacted on you carrying out your mandate to bring crime down in the country?
Mr. Speaker, let me remind the member that this administration, this year, has supplied 160 vehicles already to the police. We are, in addition to that, sir, we have an order, 119 vehicles to give to the police before Christmas. A total of 274. We also, it doesn't include the 66, we also have repaired 114 vehicles. Mr. Speaker, the Minister of National Security cannot assign vehicles to police stations. That is the job of the Commissioner of Police. Furthermore, you have 191 police stations and we have supplied 274 vehicles. Furthermore, Mr. Speaker, I would encourage the member, I would plead with the member, I would respectfully beg the member, as a conscientious citizen, as a good representative, to use his CDF and pay the $14,000, as I have done in my constituency, to assist the police. And all of us, at some point, all of us, sir, at some point, every member here at some point have contributed to the upkeep of police facilities in their constituencies. And I commend all of us. And therefore, Mr. Speaker, I would like to respectfully plead with the member to help. Because, Mr. Speaker, we know what this matter of crime can do to all of us.
Mr. Speaker, with all due respect again to the member, as I said,
members,
I give you the same regard.
18 minutes after 4 o'clock.
But, Mr.
We have
Mr.
given
Speaker,
enough latitude. Read the standing orders. Read the standing orders.
Mr. Speaker, can I go ahead?
I'm going to ask members to listen to what I'm saying before you answer.
Can I go ahead, Mr. Speaker?
So I'm going to ask you to ask a question directly as to the statement by the minister. It states clearly, other members have done it. The leader of the opposition has done it. The member from Westmoreland has done it. Have asked questions relevant to the statement. I'm going to ask you to do that. And I'm going to ask members, if you have 3 questions, ask them. I'm not going to recognize you to speak before others on a second time. Once you stand up, state your questions, Minister, write them down, and make one answer to each person asking the questions. You may proceed, please.
Yes, Mr. Speaker. Because the first 2 questions were answered, then I'll ask them again. Because after having said all that,
after the question has been answered,
no, they have not been answered.
You want a clarification to the answer, you'll be permitted to do so.
The questions were not answered. So I'm going to ask them again. I'm asking the minister if there's any data that he would have to show what is the correlation between the lack or the presence of vehicle on crime. And I would also want to ask the minister, how would you say that this non-performance that has been explained in this statement is impacted on you and the country, benefiting on the impact of crime? Those are the 2 questions I'm going to ask.
Thank you. Minister.
Mr. Speaker, there's absolutely no divide between that side and this side on the matter of crime in Jamaica. I am sure that they have an interest in getting as much vehicles to the police as we have an interest on this side. And therefore, Mr. Speaker, I am saying to the member, he asked a specific question. I don't have the answer right now, but I'll get the answer to you. I've asked DCP Blake to make sure he gets the answer and we can supply it to you. But I am very sure there is no divide between us or any Jamaican on the matter of crime and police mobility, and we are doing what we have to do to treat with the matter.
I'm going to take two more questions. One from Dr. Guy, one from Mr. Hilton, and one from Dr. Brownberg.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Order, please. Members.
Minister.
The Speaker has some authority given by the standing orders. And I'm going to ask you, let me exercise that authority. Dr. Guy,
thank you, Mr.
will you ask your question relevant to the Minister's statement? Then
if
Mr.
you
Hilton
cannot
and
assure
Dr. Burke
this
and
House,
and then Minister Grange will proceed.
Thank
Dr.
you again,
Guy.
Mr. Speaker. Minister, if you cannot assure this House that the 66 vehicles lying on the wharf waiting to be cleared are in the name or destined for the police force, then can you indicate to us in whose name and for what vehicles was the moratorium that was issued by the Ministry of Finance for?
Mr. Speaker, the member answered this question. Mr. Speaker, let me repeat. There is no divide.
The Minister, the member asked your question.
Yes, sir, and I'm answering. There is no divide between both sides of the House on the importance of getting the 66 cars as quickly as possible into the hands of the police. And we are working assiduously to get that done.
Mr. Hilton. Mr. Hilton.
Mr. Speaker, with the greatest of respect, and even to my own parishioner, he has not answered the question. The question is, Minister, and I suspect that you're answering the question that was asked previously. If you can't assure us that the 66 vehicles that are on the wharf waiting to be cleared are destined for the police, because you did indicate that you're going to research a matter and come back to the House on that, can you indicate to this House to whom this moratorium was issued for the vehicles? And further, Mr. Speaker, I want to add, was this moratorium issued for 200 vehicles? Because if it was issued for 200 vehicles, are those 200 vehicles destined for the police force, or can the supplier roll over and clear other vehicles on that moratorium and later on present the vehicles for the police?
Speaker, no, Mr. Speaker, no. The answer is no, that cannot be done.
Mr. Hilton. Mr. Hilton.
Mr. Minister, is there a vacancy for Director of Procurement in the Ministry of National Security at this time? And an allied question is, if they announce the advertisement in the paper on Sunday for a Director of Procurement, is that related in any way to the matter of the motor vehicle? Two questions.
Mr. Speaker, the Ministry of National Security has two distinct sections, policy and administration. And the administration is always recruiting, and the people are moving up, people are being promoted, and there has been an ad, and Jamaicans have been asked to apply. It has nothing, absolutely nothing, to do with the matter of the procurement of the 200 vehicles. I want to assure you, sir. And you can ask your constituents who qualify, please ask them to apply.
Dr. Brownberg.
Mr. Speaker, permission to speak from a seat that is not
proceed.
mine. That is granted. I didn't hear you.
You may proceed.
Yeah?
That's correct.
Thank you. I have, Minister, 3 related questions, but very short question. The first one is, I wanted to get your opinion on whether or not, given the present unprecedented levels of crime, notwithstanding the number of vehicles that have already been provided, do you believe that given the present levels of crime, the fact that the police, as you have said, are now not less mobile than they have been before, that is not an acceptable standard to judge? That's one. The second one was, Minister, you spoke about needing to rely on legal advice, seeking legal advice, and at one point you said you would not be rushed when asked about how quickly we would be able to see the 66 vehicles. Do you agree that, given again the state of criminal activities across the island, that Jamaicans would be correct to be impatient if a minister would say that they will not be rushed given the circumstances? So that's 2. And then the third question really is just a very simple question, Minister. I represent Southwest St. Andrew, and maybe you will know better than many others in this room, in the last 210 days, which is the period of extension that has been given beyond the 30 days, the level of criminal activity. You would know how many houses have been burnt to the ground by criminals. You would know the number of individuals who have been murdered. You would know also, Minister, the number of individuals who have been injured. You would also know, Minister, the number of families that have been displaced. And so, on their behalf, I have the final, very simple question, Minister. How soon can we expect, for example, that the Hunts Bay Police Station would get even one of the 5 vehicles that they require, even one of the 5 more that they need? And I'm not even talking about the pickup that they need to be able to respond to Riverton. I'm not even talking about the bikes that they require to police Portia Simpson Miller Square. Just one. How soon, Minister? How soon?
Mr. Speaker, 3 very good questions, member. Let me commend you on the questions. 3 very good questions. Mr. Speaker, do I believe that the amount of vehicles the police have is at acceptable standards? No. And I have always said it, and I will continue to say it, and I will continue to seek more resources to provide more vehicles and even to do creative financing. 2, the 66 vehicles. Do I agree that the state of criminal activities, and if I should be rushed to treat with moving the vehicles? Let me repeat, Mr. Speaker, that there is a process to terminate a contract, to sort through the thing. There are legal issues, and the matter is getting full and priority treatment. 3, in Southwest St. Andrew and the criminal activities, how soon will Hunts Bay get a vehicle? Madam, I do not assign vehicles to police stations, but I can say to you, and I know DCP, who is acting as commissioner, is hearing and he has heard your plea, that 119 vehicles will be provided to the Office of the Commissioner of Police before Christmas. And I am sure, having heard your plea, they will move to correct that situation. And
Ms. Grange. Ms. Grange.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, as we acknowledge the International Day for the Elimination of Violence Against Women, IDWA, and the 16 days of activism against gender-based violence, the government of Jamaica joins with other concerned voices to condemn the scourge of violence which is faced by women across the world. The issue of violence against women in Jamaica is a complex one, and I ask my colleagues in this House
Mr. Speaker,
that we all join hands.
You understand a point of order?
Yes, we normally would have received by now a copy of the statement, so I'm just inquiring. Of course it is.
All right, I will, it's coming. My apologies, it's coming. I ask all my colleagues to join hands because this is not a controversial issue that begs a political divide. It is one of unity. So the issue of violence against women in Jamaica is a complex one, rooted in social, historical, cultural, religious, and other structural inequalities that affect the lives of women regardless of their class, age, ethnicity, and race. The government of Jamaica has signaled its commitment to the achievement of Goal 5 of the Sustainable Development Goals, SDGs, which addresses the empowerment of all women and girls and the achievement of gender equality. This requires an increase in the allocation of resources which are needed for greater efficiency and to bring an end to violence against women and girls. Several measures, Mr. Speaker, have been implemented through partnership with various international agencies, women's advocacy groups, and civil society to formulate adequate solutions to address the vexed issue of gender-based violence. This administration takes a zero-tolerance approach to all forms of violence and is committed to implementing measures to combat gender-based and other forms of violence in Jamaica. This approach is intended to provide strengthening of existing systems to treat these offenses and other forms of gender-based violence. Gender-based violence is a complex and cross-cutting issue which requires sustained and intensive efforts at multi-dimensional levels to address the issue in a holistic manner. We must break the silence and we must combat attitudes and norms which consider abusing another human being as normal or acceptable. Today, Mr. Speaker, we launch an innovative and dynamic tool that will help to create a gender-sensitive environment and reinforce gender equality within the workplace. The Gender Equality Seal Certification Program is an internationally recognized initiative that was created to reduce gender inequalities in the workplace and improve the lives of all employees and their families. It targets private and public enterprises to increase productivity and profitability through the use of gender mainstreaming techniques. It is built on the premise that the promotion of non-discriminatory practices in the workplace is crucial in building a stronger economy. Mr. Speaker, Jamaica is positioned to lead the way in spearheading this vital tool as we are the first English-speaking country in the Caribbean to pilot the program. The government of Jamaica has made commendable strides in the fight against gender inequality in the society. And as such, this is reflected in the country's national policies, programs, and plans of action. The National Policy for Gender Equality seeks to address inequalities and gender-based discrimination to create a gender-harmonious society. The recently approved National Strategic Action Plan to eliminate gender-based violence in Jamaica is a comprehensive framework towards eliminating gender-based violence in the Jamaican society. So, Mr. Speaker and colleagues, I use this opportunity to encourage all members of Parliament and all relevant stakeholders and partners to come on board to address the scourge of gender-based violence. I ask you to wear your purple ribbon and to demonstrate your solidarity. Finally, I urge you to use your positions of power and influence to change the culture of violence. Our voices must be heard advocating for the rights of women and girls, men and boys, to enable them to be active participants in the development of our nation, Jamaica land we love. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Ms. Shirley.
Mr. Speaker, as an opposition, we certainly add our voices in expressing our deep concern for the dreadful acts of criminal violence which has been taking place against our girls and our women. Our women, Mr. Speaker, across the world, not just in Jamaica, have been experiencing high levels of violence over a long period of time. As a matter of fact, the WHO estimates that 1 out of every 3 women in the world will have experienced some form of violence, perhaps sexual violence, physical violence, you too. And the truth is, oftentimes this violence is inflicted through intimate partnership. Mr. Speaker, one of the things that is clear in Jamaica is that our culture still supports the violence against women, and certainly as it relates to what happens in our homes. Our police force at this time, I believe, is woefully inadequately equipped to deal with gender violence. One, because they're not properly tooled, not sufficiently mobile, because I know of one case in my own constituency where 5 times in one night, a female kept on calling the police station at Bogwalk to indicate that her partner was beating her severely, and no response. She was told at one point that when the vehicle returned from patrol, the one vehicle, that they would probably come to see her. It never happened. They're also woefully equipped because they're not properly trained. When they do turn up at the homes where domestic violence occurs, oftentimes they tell the little lady, relax yourself, man. It's okay. We'll soon make it up. It's not a big deal. Wash your face. Cook him something nice. And I've had these reports where police oftentimes take these reports as simply just another case of a love spat. It is when it ends in fatality that we often hear communities rebel. Mr. Speaker, our children are also suffering from the gender-based violence because oftentimes the domestic abuse takes place in front of the eyes of innocent children, who themselves then become perpetrators of similar crimes as they become adults, because children do live what they learn. And so they go to school and they display this kind of dysfunctional behavior throughout their lifetimes. Mr. Speaker, today I want to express my own condolence to those families which would have suffered this kind of loss. Children who are without mothers, husbands who are without wives, parents who are without their children today because of violence against women and girls. We must resolve, Mr. Speaker, as a parliament here today, and exercise our political will to want to do more than to speak about violence against women, but to do something about violence against women. It is okay to legislate, but we can't legislate behavior. We must teach, we must train, we must inculcate from within our schools the kind of behavior that allows our people to understand that our women are our mothers, and the mothers of our nation must be protected, if it so pleases you.
Prime Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. By way of update, this afternoon, the last batch of 123 Jamaica Defence Force soldiers arrived at the Norman Manley International Airport from Dominica. These soldiers have been assisting our CARICOM partner nation since the 26th of September 2017 in the aftermath of the devastating Category 5 hurricane which hit that country, Hurricane Maria. Mr. Speaker, it is important to note that Hurricane Maria caused damages and losses that amounted to 226% of the GDP of Dominica. Almost every section of the island suffered catastrophic damage, with 95% of the population being impacted. This was compounded by looting, which took place immediately thereafter. Mr. Speaker, on screen are pictures of the devastation in the island. So, Mr. Speaker, you can imagine that when the call came for help, Jamaica had to answer. Mr. Speaker, I had some other pictures to show you, but of the JDF campsite that they had established, of our officers clearing debris. But this one in particular, Mr. Speaker, which showed just one of the main roads in the capital that was totally flooded out with debris, and our soldiers were there clearing it. Mr. Speaker, we deployed a 4-man security advisory group led by Colonel Jamie Ogilvie to give direct advice to Prime Minister Roosevelt Skerrit and his government on national recovery and security matters, as well as a 119-man disaster assistance response team led by Major Carl Clark. And on screen, you can see Colonel Ogilvie in advising Prime Minister Skerrit. The DART team consisted of JDF engineers, people in the logistics unit, infantry, and medical personnel. The flexibility of the JDF to quickly task and organize the teams for this deployment and for such an extended period at short notice is testimony to their continued relevance, professionalism, and commitment to undertake any task given. They are indeed one of our institutions which we can all be justly proud. Over the course of the last 2 months, the DART team performed a range of vital tasks in Dominica. They included the removal of debris from the capital city, Roseau, engineering work on the Roseau Regional Ferry Terminal, internal security operations, that is, they were tasked to patrol and protect key points within Dominica, augmenting the local police in many areas, including at their international airport. In terms of maritime security and interdiction, one of our vessels assisted the Coast Guard, Dominica Coast Guard, and in terms of assisting with the logistics for relief supplies, we undertook that as well and partnered with other militaries in the region to provide assistance. We also undertook property damage assessments of all police stations, and indeed we repaired some police stations. And we supported other international organizations and aid agencies, and we gave general engineering assistance and the delivery of health services at the Roseau Health Clinic. Mr. Speaker, of specific significance is that the bridge leading to one of the main tourist attractions, the Wattenwaven hot springs on the island, was destroyed. On screen now, we are seeing the JDF engineers who constructed that bridge so that the attraction could be open next year for the winter season when their cruise ships would come. We were asked to construct a new bridge in that location, much as we did after the passage of Tropical Storm Erika some 2 years ago in another section of Dominica, which, it should be noted, was one of the very few bridges that survived Hurricane Maria. Again, testimony to the work that was done. Mr. Speaker, I wish to place on record here that the partnership between the JDF and the National Works Agency has been outstanding in the construction of this new bridge, which is scheduled to be open in time, as I said earlier, for the arrival of the first cruise ships to Dominica in January 2018. And you can see that the bridge is almost near completion. The Security Assistance Group conducted liaison and coordination with the government ministries and agencies in an effort to assist with the restoration of a safe and secure environment, the streamlining of governmental strategic oversight, coordination, command and control of the relief process, as well as negotiations with key local, regional and international stakeholders in order to ensure the timely receipt, accountability and throughput of relief supplies and assistance. Mr. Speaker, from all indications, the Commonwealth of Dominica benefited tremendously from our decision to deploy this JDF contingent to their island, and their exemplary performance has ensured that our national flag was proudly worn by our soldiers as a welcome sight all over the island. On screen now, you are seeing how well received our soldiers were with the local Dominican public. Mr. Speaker, we wish to say thanks to the JDF and to all of the other entities who made this deployment the success that it has been, including the Ministry of National Security, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Foreign Trade, and the National Works Agency, as well as many others behind the scenes who made it possible. And in particular, Mr. Speaker, I want to say thanks to the Canadian government, who provided us the initial airlift to get our troops into Dominica, and to the government of Bahamas, who assisted with one of their vessels, one of their barges, to carry back some of our equipment. This deployment, Mr. Speaker, emphasizes the need for regional integration and mutual support in the face of the adverse effects of climate change and catastrophic weather events. This government is committed to supporting our regional partners in recovering from these events, as we would expect our regional partners to support us. God forbid such an event to happen to us. We, Mr. Speaker, have shown the real meaning of being our brother's keeper and the real purpose of having a regional cooperative system through CARICOM. Indeed, Mr. Speaker, again, we remain mindful and thankful that we are cognizant of the saying, today for you, tomorrow for me. Mr. Speaker, as Caribbean nations, we must remain close in word and deed as we overcome our challenges and support each other. We are indeed our brother's keeper. Mr. Speaker, just to respond to the informal query about the CARICOM report, the CARICOM report is still before Cabinet, and it will be addressed as one of the first reports early next year. In fact, I want to take it in the second sitting of Parliament next year. So we have a subcommittee of Cabinet that has been assigned to review it. It is in that process of review, and we hope to be able to bring it to Parliament after that review, the second sitting of Parliament in January. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Dr. Phillips.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I think it behooves me to say on behalf of the opposition, and indeed that we join with the government in conveying our congratulations to the brave men and women of the Jamaica Defense Force for their support and hard work in Dominica. I think it is clear that we are, certainly this year, while we give thanks to God that Jamaica was spared, direct hit by a hurricane or even any hurricane damage at all. I think we are always very much aware of the fact that escape is a chance phenomenon in these circumstances. And because of that, if for no other reason, we always have to be willing to lend a hand when we can to those who are affected. Dominica was the worst affected, but other countries were affected. And as we experienced when we had Gilbert and Ivan, you know, you're on the news in the immediate aftermath, but the repair and recovery work, you're often very much alone, and there are few who understand the plight of the long-term recovery, the homes without roofs still, and the communities without lights. Part of my inquiry of the Prime Minister is what reports he would have about the actual state of the recovery in Dominica. I know the JDF contingent has returned, but I understand that power is still absent for most people, and there may be other areas, and whether there is any consideration, whether as part of CARICOM or individually, for any longer-term support in any way to Antigua, Dominica, or any of the
other countries which have been affected, whether through support linesmen from power company or anything else that may have been requested and considered. And the final 2 points I would make. One is to reiterate and to join with the Prime Minister in recognizing the importance of regional cooperation. We are small countries in a world which increasingly requires each one to row their own canoe. But as small countries, we, in times like these, it must be clear to us that we are better off together as a small region, working to give our voice meaning in the world, to amplify the voice of the individual countries by joining together, but also to see how we can deepen this experience of regional cooperation and extend it in ways that will give us a better chance at survival in this current world environment. The other point that I would make is to highlight the need for climate adaptation and resilience activities. It is apparent, even in the changed weather patterns that we are witnessing here this year, the increased rainfall spread across months that were usually dry, at least in terms of typical weather patterns. In terms of the changing weather patterns elsewhere in the world, that we are witnessing a long-term climate change phenomenon. I know that Jamaica is committed to that process, the global process, and there have been occurrences. We're shifting out to renewables and being less dependent on fossil fuels for our energy. But the fact of the matter is that we also need to undertake the adaptation activities in relation to our beaches, in relation to our rivers and our waterways, in relation to our mountainsides. Otherwise, when an event such as occurred in Dominica may happen here, God forbid, we would be more prepared than would be the case had we not undertaken these activities. So once again, congratulations to the JDF. I think they have, as always, carried our flag high, and we appreciate them. We need to care for them, and we need to give them our full respect. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, your leave.
Oh, go ahead, Doctor.
Yes.
And then Mr. Tweed.
So, Prime Minister, I think this is not something that's at all contentious. I think we're all proud of the work that the Army and the NWA have done. And as you said, as our brother's keeper. Mr. Prime Minister, it's interesting because in 2010, after the Haiti earthquake, I went over in a different capacity as a medical doctor at that point to Haiti. And one of the things that became very obvious to me was the fact that our army had gone in and within 48 hours had set up their tents, their generators, they had gotten water, they had become self-sufficient. And, you know, there's a lot of discussion from time to time about whether or not we should join the police force and the army into one. It became obvious to me at that point that that is not an option, because what had happened in Haiti is that the police force, which is not, has the rules of the army, everybody had gone from the police force to go home to see what had happened to their families. And you had even the president sitting on the sidewalk, no communications, nothing, and dependent on all these other countries whose armies had come in, set up their bases, and were giving support to the country. So it's something that we have to learn as we go along, because thank God we had that situation, and even in a crisis in Jamaica, we have an army that is able to respond in that manner here in Jamaica. As was said before, the change in the climate change that's going on now, we are seeing not just a high intensity of storms or greater number, but the intensity is even more. And as many persons, I was down in the Eastern Caribbean, and as many people are saying, it is possibly a question more of if rather, or when rather than if. And so we have to help. I would make a suggestion, Prime Minister, that I think that we could look at. There is possibly a need for our countries, recognizing the difficulties we face with climate change, to look in the different countries and get together the engineering corps. Get different engineers out of the different countries and form one engineer corps that would work together as a reserve, so that when we see hurricanes coming, they may well be able to be deployed not just after, but possibly before or immediately after, but you would have something set up so that we can deal with these issues in a more efficient manner. So I'm wondering if it's something we could look at, possibly under the banner of CARICOM or even wider, because the entire Caribbean, there are other countries that could be extended. So with that, Prime Minister, I would just join with yourself and the Leader of the Opposition just in saying that we are all proud of Jamaica's response and the response of our people in uniform. Thank you.
Mr. Tweed.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the Army has done us proud, and the very points made by the member for West Westmoreland should indicate to this House more clearly than we have recognized before the potential of the Army to act in a disciplined, ordered, and self-sufficient manner. And I again commend to the government and to all the members of the House to consider the greater deployment of the Army in terms of the social reconstruction of our youth. This is a case where, an instance where domestically their ability to change circumstances and to retrain young people is underutilized. This is an asset which we have not fully engaged, and I commend it arising out of the obvious competence of their engagement in rescue operations, as in Dominica. The second thing is, when this matter was ventilated a few months ago in Parliament, the Prime Minister agreed that a necessity was to have efficient transportation within the CARICOM region, at least, in instances of disaster. You know, Mr. Prime Minister, I noticed where a ship that has been sequestered in our harbor for many months, if not longer, is now on auction sale. And I don't know if that would interest you, the government, in terms of having an asset, obviously at a knockdown price, which could be utilized in circumstances like this, placed at the command of the Caribbean Maritime University. Or whether you may have made initiatives, I'm inquiring, with foreign partners, notably the United States, Canada, the United Kingdom, for the enablement. Because what mustn't happen is that next year we are still bucking and shuffling when there is an instance, and we can't move our troops, if necessary, or ourselves, supplies, whatever services have to be moved from one area to another without depending on somebody else's beneficence. And thirdly, you know, Mr. Speaker, I asked the Minister of Finance question some time ago about our financial capacity to withstand the kind of disaster that has hit Dominica, Barbuda, Puerto Rico. And he indicated very, very honestly and humbly that the provisions in the budget were inadequate and, in fact, had been exhausted. Now, we are looking forward, and I agree, without being a Job's comforter, that it is a matter of when Jamaica has to face a Category 4 or Category 5 hurricane. And I asked this House the question, are we getting ready for that? And should we not, in the crafting of the budget that is coming forward, at the end of the financial year, not be making the appropriate provisions so that we can begin, we can't do it in 1 year, but begin to be prepared better than we have before. Mr. Speaker, we, unlike Puerto Rico, and even then, we have no books to depend upon to help us out. So we are going to be on our own more so than ever before. And we better be prepared for that and make the necessary sacrifices and give the appropriate priorities to disaster preparedness. I trust the Prime Minister will address those matters.
Mr. Hilton.
Shut your mouth. Hear me.
Mr. Hilton, address the Speaker.
Mr. Speaker.
Mr.
Speaker. Mr. Speaker.
Proceed, Mr. Hilton.
Even as I join the Prime Minister and the Leader of Opposition in commending the tremendous work carried out by the JDF in Dominica, I'm compelled to ask the Prime Minister, on whose initiative the JDF went to Dominica to carry out this great works on behalf of and in support of a CARICOM partner. I'm compelled to ask the question whether, Mr. Prime Minister, what has happened to the report of the review committee, the Golding Committee? Okay, all right, good.
Announcements.
Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker.
I'm sorry.
May I just ask the Prime Minister, what is the status of the CARICOM body looking at climate change across CARICOM?
Is that it?
Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Golden?
Yes, I wanted to just make one quick point as a question to the Prime Minister, if I may. I have some family in Dominica, and what was clear was in the aftermath of the hurricane, the first few days was a horrible experience for everybody there, because apart from the disaster that had occurred in terms of physical damage to virtually all assets that they had, there was lawlessness and mayhem on the street and looting and general crisis of law and order. And I think the feeling was that the response to that, which was really from the lower part of CARICOM, the Eastern Caribbean zone, SEDIMA, I think, works on a zone basis, and responsibility to respond to Dominica was, from SEDIMA, was for the lower Caribbean. The response wasn't as lower Eastern Caribbean, Barbados and Trinidad in particular. The feeling on the ground was that it took too long to get outside law and order support. And I think there's some lessons that we need to learn as CARICOM from that. That is critical that when these things happen, the response, the initial response, which is Jamaica provided, I would say, sort of phase 2 of the response, which was to try and get things built back again, and indeed supported the law and order issues as well. But the earliest phase, I think CARICOM, the mechanisms of CARICOM aren't responding quickly enough. And I think that's something I'd like to see us take up in the design of our response, not nationally, but through the CARICOM institutions that are designed to respond to these things, to see how we can get the shortest possible time between the disaster occurring and law and order being restored. So.
I wish to thank members for the support that they have given to the JDF. I'll start with the member from South St. Andrew. I recall vividly the Saturday evening that I got a call from someone in the CARICOM Secretariat expressing the same concern that you're expressing, that there was now a breakdown in law and order in Dominica, in particular in the capital city, and that the other islands that had given support, Trinidad and Barbados, that the support was insufficient, primarily because there was no airlift capacity. So what they sent in terms of troops were inadequate. And having that consideration that there could be a breakdown of law and order, we decided to respond immediately and send the DART team. So the DART team, that is a disaster assessment and response team, they actually, their first duty was to assist in the restoration of law and order. And the first set who went assisted the police force. And so I'm agreeing with you a week after, but I'm agreeing with you that the capacity of the region to respond to these disasters is limited at best, primarily because we do not have dedicated airlift or sea lift capacity. That's without question. So to answer the member from Central Kingston, the Army is now looking at the possibilities as to what assets Jamaica could acquire. That is the first step, what assets we could acquire that will give us the mobility, not just to serve other islands, but if we had a disaster here and any of our communities were cut off and we needed to have rapid emergency responses. So we're looking at that. They will give us some indication very shortly. It will have a budgetary implication, and no doubt when it is time for us to consider it, we will have to have a special committee to examine that. And I want to join you, two members, in agreeing that the Army has a tremendous capacity to assist with the social engineering of our young people. The challenge is that that capacity, though tremendous, is being called upon by other demands, supporting our police in crime fighting. I don't believe we quite understand the extent to which the Army is out there toe-to-toe with the policemen, giving them support in operations and in surveillance and intelligence. And the support that they give just in terms of the engineering and logistics support. We've kept within the last 3 or so weeks 3 major events. The logistics behind those major conferences, the Army played a critical role in the security and in the general logistics and seamlessness of those operations. The truth is that, were it up to me alone, then the Army would have a far greater role and more resources because the truth is they are the last bastion and repository of the critical skills necessary to manage not just the logistics, but the operations of complex mobilization and enterprise. And we rely on them for this. In terms of, for the leader of the opposition, what is the status now in the Dominican Republic? I have not received a report. They will give me a report very soon. But from what I've discerned in the media, that the recovery is going apace, that recently there was a donor conference for the Caribbean, in particular for Dominica. The pledge, the target was to raise something like $2 billion. I'm not certain what they will raise. But as I've said in other fora, the days of aid should be brought to an end very quickly. The truth is that it is better to make an investment in resilience than to go cap in hand asking for aid. What we have seen with these conferences is that, the pledge is way up here, but what is actually delivered is way down here. So the question about climate change, I will be going to France on weekend. On Sunday I leave to attend a climate change conference. Very important that Jamaica's voice is heard in this matter. Clearly you would have seen that there is, major countries have started to rethink their positions within the climate change framework that was established. And so it is important for countries like Jamaica that will be at the front line of the effects of climate change, that our voices be heard. The truth is that we need to have established a global system where countries that are big emitters pay for their pollution to countries who are not emitters but who will suffer the consequences of the pollution. I think it is only fair. And the truth is as well that countries like Jamaica, we have accepted our responsibility. We have continued in terms of making provisions for the, not just mitigation, but for the resilience of our infrastructure. I think I could say that if we were affected by a major hurricane, yes, we would have significant damage. But certainly the new infrastructure that we have put in, I would expect them to be able to stand up and be able to provide access and mobility in the event of a major natural disaster. So I think that we have started, Mr. Speaker, we have started to build into our infrastructure resilience. If you look at what we're doing on, for example, the Mandela Highway, you will notice that we are making significant provisions for drainage. And all the roads that we are doing now, significant provisions for drainage and ensuring that they are built to the highest standard. Mr. Speaker, we could not say this about existing infrastructure. Certainly when we were building, the concept of climate change was not something that was in the forefront of our minds when we were building 20, 30 years ago. So much of that infrastructure would have to be retrofitted or properly maintained. So, Mr. Speaker, again, let me thank the members for their participation. Let me thank the JDF for the work that they have done in making Jamaica proud, and we wish the best for the people of Dominica.
Announcements.
Laid on the table of the House today are the following. Minister Paper number 69 entitled Replenishment of the Multilateral Investment Fund of the Inter-American Development Bank. Annual report and audited financial statements of the Jamaica Civil Aviation Authority, JCAA, for the financial year 2016-2017. Annual report of the University of Technology, Jamaica, for the year 2014-2015. Auditor General's assessment of the financial statement analysis, Clarendon Alumina Production Limited. First supplementary estimates 27-2018, Ministry of Finance and the Public Service. First supplementary estimates of revenue and expenditure of public bodies. The Civil Service Establishment Act, Civil Service Establishment General Order 2017, and the Civil Service Establishment General Order 27 Resolution. Report of the Public Administration and Appropriations Committee on its deliberations on the Ministry of National Security. Auditor General's Department Performance Audit Report on the Government of Jamaica's progress towards Vision 2030 NDP Outcome Number 10, Diversification of Energy Supply and Sustainable Development Goal Number 7, Affordable and Clean Energy.
Bills brought from the Senate.
The following is a message from the President of the Senate to the Honourable House of Representatives. I have the honour to advise the Honourable House of Representatives that on the first day of December 2017, a bill entitled An Act to Amend the Special Economic Zones Act was passed in the Senate without amendment. Signed, Thomas Tavares Finson, QC CD, JP, President of the Senate.
Petitions, papers, reports from committees.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to lay on the table of the House a copy of the report of the Public Administration and Appropriations Committee of the House of Representatives and its deliberations on the Ministry of National Security.
Notice of motions given orally.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to give notice that at the next meeting of the House, I will move the following motion. Be it resolved that the report of the Public Administration and Appropriations Committee of the House of Representatives on its deliberations on the Ministry of National Security, which was laid on the table of the House on the 5th day of December 2017, be approved.
Mr. Samudo.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to give notice that at the next meeting of the House, I will move to introduce and have read a first time a bill shortly entitled The Protection of Geographical Indications Amendments Act 2017.
Dr. Phillips.
Mr. Speaker, beg to give notice that at the next sitting of the House, I will move, whereas the National Identification and Registration Act 2017 has created controversy in the society, and whereas there were 268 different amendments made to the bill in the House of Representatives and the Senate, and whereas over 60,000 Jamaicans residing in Jamaica and abroad have signed an online petition raising concerns about the proposed national identification system and demanding consultation with the people of Jamaica. And whereas the Prime Minister said that he is prepared to have further discussion on the matter, be it resolved that the National Identification and Registration Act 2017 not take effect immediately, and that a special parliamentary committee be established to allow for the fullest consultations with the public and all interested stakeholders alongside the required regulations relating to critical operational issues of the national identification system.
Mr. Speaker, on behalf of the member for St. Catherine Southern, I beg to give notice that at the next meeting of the House, he will seek leave of the House to introduce and have read a first time a bill shortly entitled the Banking Services Amendment Act 2017.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to give notice that at the next meeting of the House, I will move the following motion. Be it resolved that the first supplementary estimates of expenditure for the financial year ending March 31, 2018, and the first supplementary estimates 2017-2018 estimates of revenue and expenditure of public bodies, which were laid on the table of the House on the 5th day of December 2017, be referred to the Public Administration and Appropriations Committee of the House of Representatives for consideration and report. Mr. Speaker, I further beg to give notice that at a later stage today, I'll move for the suspension of the standing orders to enable me to take this motion. And Mr. Speaker, I further beg to give notice that at the next meeting of the House, I will move the Civil Service Establishment Act, General Order 2017 Resolution. Whereas Section 3, Subsection 1 of the Civil Service Establishment Act, hereinafter referred to as the Act, provides that the Minister may by order constitute or abolish offices in the public service. And whereas on the 14th day of November 2017, the Minister made the Civil Service Establishment General Order 2017. And whereas it is provided by Section 3, Subsection 4 of the Act, that an order made under the section shall be subject to affirmative resolution of the House of Representatives, now therefore be it resolved by this Honourable House as follows. 1. This resolution may be cited as the Civil Service Establishment General Order 2017 Resolution. 2. The Civil Service Establishment General Order 2017, which was laid on the table of the House on the 5th day of December 2017, is affirmed.
Questions and answers to questions?
No. But not, I have to ask permission. Mr. Speaker, in that it's after 3:15, the standing order provides for questions to be answered up in 3:15. I ask that the standing order be suspended to allow us the taking of questions and answer the questions.
Those in favor? Those against? As far as I'm concerned, the members did not respond to that motion. Next item.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to...
Aye, I said that. He said aye. He said aye. You didn't hear. I said aye.
I will again put the motion to extend the time. And this time, if members do not respond, we go to the next item. Those in favor of the motion to extend the time? Those against? The ayes have it. Dr. McNeil?
So you didn't hear it the first time, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I beg to give notice that at the expiration of 21 days, I will ask the Minister of Tourism the following questions.
Mr. Speaker, the Minister of Finance will take question 23, posed by the member from Central Manchester.
Mr. Bunting, you will request the Minister
Speaker,
to answer your question.
May I ask the Minister of Finance and the Public Service to answer the question standing in my name?
Minister Shaw.
Mr. Speaker, question 1. It's okay. It's all right. Would the Minister please state what tax incentives are currently in place for foreign-owned companies operating in Jamaica? Further, would the Minister please provide a list of these incentives by company? The government provides a menu of fiscal incentives that are accessible across several economic sectors. These incentives do not discriminate between foreign-owned and locally owned companies. It should be noted that a company, although incorporated in another jurisdiction, must be registered with the Companies Office of Jamaica in order to trade within the country. The company would therefore be considered resident for tax purposes. The incentives are rules-based and non-discriminatory. That is to say, the entity may access the incentives as long as the entity is a registered company in Jamaica and is operating a productive activity in the eligible sectors. The table which is provides a summary of the available incentives, Mr. Speaker. And those incentives are broadly under a fiscal incentives regime, which includes customs tariff, the Fiscal Miscellaneous Provisions Act, the Stamp Duty Act, and the Income Tax Large Scale and Pioneer Industries Act. Then there's the Bauxite and Aluminum Encouragement Act. There's the Urban Renewal Tax Relief Act. There's the Income Tax Act, which specifically relates to the Junior Stock Exchange Venture Capital Approved Group Head Office. There's the General Consumption Tax Special Economic Zone Incentive Program. Question 2. Would the Minister please state what are the related tax expenditure for each of these companies? Well, we have not listed companies here, Mr. Speaker, as that would be, as can be appreciated, would be very voluminous. Tax expenditures are essentially tax foregone. That is to say, tax expenditures are special provisions of the tax code, such as exclusions, deductions, deferrals, credits, and tax rates that benefit specific activities or groups of taxpayers. The tax expenditure statement, which is tabled in the Parliament with the budget annually, provides a summary of these tax expenditures, broken down by the major tax types and types of expenditures. The tax expenditure statement does not seek to isolate any company, but rather looks at the data in a holistic manner to inform the waiver and incentives policy. Question 3. Would the Minister please state what is the monitoring arrangement in place to ensure there is no leakage or application of the incentive beyond the specified parameters? Answer. Generally, for the incentives currently in place, monitoring is carried out by the tax administration bodies, Tax Administration Jamaica and Jamaica Customs Agency. Both these entities engage in post-audit operations separately and jointly to ensure that the incentives provided are properly administered or applied within the specified parameters. Question 4. Would the Minister please state what is the level of compliance with required reporting by these companies? Upon registration of a company, information is automatically provided to the Tax Administration Jamaica with the advent of the company registration superform. In addition, there has been increased efficiency with the Revenue Administration Information System, RAISE system. The systems are linked and the registration automatically triggers a provision of a tax account from which compliance action is generated based on the tax type. Additionally, all companies are required by law to file requisite returns, which provide updated relevant information for further compliance action. Question 5. Would the Minister please state whether or not compensating incentives are available to locally owned companies operating in these sectors? Response. It should be noted that ownership, that is foreign or local, is not considered as a basis for granting incentives. As indicated in the earlier response, the fiscal incentives are available to all companies registered in Jamaica and operating in the eligible sectors. Notwithstanding anything to the contrary, and for the avoidance of doubt, it should be noted that the tax legislation generally confers certain discretionary powers on the Minister of Finance. Based on our current fiscal imperatives, these powers are limited by a cap of $10 million Jamaican dollars per month.
Mr. Bonton.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I want to thank the Minister for his answers, although they are quite vague and essentially encapsulates the policy, the broad policy. And I really was seeking some more specific information. However, then perhaps I can elicit them in my follow-up questions. The table you provided, Minister, in response to question 1, under which one of these incentives would these nationally important projects fall, like a north-south highway or building something on the Kingston terminal? These national projects that the contractors get specific incentives. Under which one of these incentives you outlined would that fall, or would it be a special, a special allowance for those? That's question 1. The question 2 is, you mentioned here in the table the Bauxite and Aluminium Encouragement Act. And I know under this act, most of the inputs that the bauxite companies import or otherwise acquire are exempt from GCT and SCT and all those things. But I want to ask specifically, where you have, for example, non-bauxite companies that supply the bauxite companies, say for example with limestone that they burn in their kilns, do any of the benefits that are provided to the bauxite companies, is it passed through to those companies, and specifically the waiver of duties on fuel? That's the second question. And the third question has to do with a more general issue of incentives to the micro, small, and medium-sized enterprises. And I made reference to it in my discussion with last week or a couple of weeks ago when Minister of Industry, Commerce, and Agriculture tabled the green paper on the MSME sector. And although he has responsibility for the sector, truthfully, most of the incentives come back to the Ministry of Finance. And I think he agreed with me that one of the areas that we could avoid is this tax upon tax, the accumulation of taxes, SCT upon GCT, etc. And particularly in that sector where diesel fuel, which goes into transportation, which goes into heavy equipment, which goes into generators, boilers, etc., has all SCT, whether fixed SCT or ad valorem SCT. And none of that can be offset against the output, which is the GCT, because it's SCT. And in fact, in one of the technical assistance programs from the IMF, they recommended that the ad valorem SCT be replaced with a GCT. And I'm not saying it here to increase the overall taxation, just replace the ad valorem SCT with a GCT so that it could at least be offset as an input tax against the output tax on the other side and reduce the overall burden of taxation on these entities, which, depending on the industry, can be as high as 30% of sales. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank the honourable member. First of all, the first question had to do with the question of the highway construction program. And yes, and the issue, Mr. Speaker, is that in relation to the highway program, whether it was in terms of those major projects, were primarily driven by government loans, which were applied for, such as the JDIP and the MIDP programs, and that these primarily were government projects that benefited, therefore, by special incentives in terms of the government, because otherwise we'd end up really taxing ourselves. And these, of course, would have preceded the change in the income tax regime of 2013. So many of these highway programs were really legacy. Yes, that's precisely. And we are therefore obliged to continue with the incentives as they originally were applied. Now, in relation to the bauxite and alumina sector, as the former minister is aware, the Bauxite Industry Encouragement Act is a fairly generous act that provides incentives to the industry for a whole range of items, of raw materials and equipment and so on that are directly related to the operations. His particular reference to subsidiary services, such as limestone, that are used in the industry, and the fuel taxes that are applied to that. Is it that you're saying that that fuel is also, from your knowledge, I'm just seeking clarification, is it that that fuel is itself tax-free?
Yes, my understanding is that the fuel that a bauxite company is allowed to bring in for their own use is also provided to the people who quarry the limestone. And so because their major customer is the bauxite alumina company. Of course, it creates an issue because 70 or 75% of their product is sold back into the local market. And this would therefore give them a huge advantage from the cost of fuel standpoint. So I understand that I don't have any evidence. So I am really asking you to confirm whether this is so or not.
Well, Mr. Speaker, what I can say, I can't confirm anything at this stage. What I would be prepared to do is, I think it's a legitimate question, because if 25% of the product is used in the industry and the other 75% is used in competition with other people to the general public, and those specified companies are getting the fuel tax-free for all purposes, then that would not be a level playing field for the industry as a whole. So therefore, it would require an investigation by the tax administration of Jamaica, and I'm going to ensure that that is done, because I would have more than a passing interest in that matter, since, of course, we would be deprived of revenue as well. In terms of the final question on the small and medium enterprises and the complexity of the fuel tax arrangements, which has SCT, the ad valorem, GCT, I think, quite frankly, Mr. Speaker, that it's something that really could be subject to review, so that there should be a tendency to put everything more towards GCT, so that the principle of applying input and output taxes can be put in there, and I think it would create a better playing field, as well as create more ability for competitiveness in the production process. So I undertake, Mr. Speaker, in both those respects, the limestone fuel as well as the question of the rationalization of the fuel taxes, that I'm prepared to have a look at those, careful look at those. Thank you very much.
Motions that may be made at the commencement of public business require notice. Motions relating to the sittings of the House. Presentation of bills without leave of the House first obtained.
Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Henry.
I now move to introduce and have read a first time a bill shortly entitled the Balanced Water Management Act 2017.
A bill shortly entitled the Balanced Water Management Act 2017, read a first time.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to give notice of a second reading of the bill.
Public business. Mr. Shaw.
I now move for the suspension of the standing orders to enable me to take the motion, notice of which I gave earlier.
Those in favor? Those against? Ayes have it. Members, we are not participating in the proceedings. Mr. Shaw.
Mr. Speaker, I now move. Mr. Speaker, I now move, be it resolved that the first supplementary estimates of expenditure for the financial year ending March 31, 2018, and the first supplementary estimates 2017-18 estimates of revenue and expenditure of public bodies, which were laid on the table of the House on the 5th day of December 2017, be referred to the Public Administration and Appropriations Committee of the House of Representatives for consideration and report. Mr. Speaker, it is intended that the PAAC, in discussion with the chairman, have kindly consented to review the supplementary estimates tomorrow morning, and so that we would move from there to the Standing Finance Committee at 1 o'clock, and that the supplementary estimates would be considered at the sitting of the House thereafter tomorrow. Thank you very much.
Those in favor?
And we are grateful for the the support of the opposition.
Those
in regard to
against?
this schedule.
Mr. Speaker, on the public business and the constituency debate, we continue with the presentation from the member for St. James West Central and the member for St. Elizabeth North Eastern.
Mrs. Ford.
May it please you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I stand here as the representative of the people of the St. James West Central constituency. As many know, the constituency comprises 3 electoral divisions, they being the Spring Garden Division, the Granville Division, and the Mount Salem Division. I have been working very closely with the councillors in these divisions. 2 represent the opposition party and 1 the governing party. Mr. Speaker, like most constituents, most constituents across the island, the people of St. James West Central have asked me to express their gratitude for a number of things and also to express their concerns about other things. We are part of the parish of St. James, Mr. Speaker, and are affected by what is happening with the escalating murder and gun crimes. Just this week, we have seen additional lives taken. A number of communities are in fear of those members of their own communities who have shown little or no regard for safety. And so, on behalf of those constituents who are law-abiding and who are working to ensure the safety of the children in particular, I am asking, Mr. Speaker, the others who are going about creating mayhem to really stop and think about the impact it is having in those communities. Only last week, Mr. Speaker, I was called in to an area of Pit 4 on a report that men armed with high-powered weapons were walking through the community, shooting up the area. Children were not able to go to school. Then I was called into another section of the Granville Division, where persons have taken it upon themselves to burn out houses because of disagreement. There is occurring, Mr. Speaker, right now in St. James, unspeakable evil. And we hear about it in the news. But as a member of parliament, I have had to go and visit the victims. Not too long ago, the Honourable Prime Minister accompanied me to one constituent who was mourning the death of her daughter, brutally gunned down in the most brazen circumstances. Mr. Speaker, we cannot continue to have this happening in the West. We cannot continue, or anywhere else. And sometimes we get caught up in all kinds of irrelevant discussions without truly understanding that the crime is hurting all of us. All of us. But, Mr. Speaker, even as the government tries to find meaningful solution, everyone knows that the first zone of special operations was declared in the St. James West Central constituency. I'm pleased, Mr. Speaker, that in spite of the challenges, the zone has been a demonstration to the people that things can work and law and order can be restored to communities. The Honourable Prime Minister recently gave an update in his report on a number of things, positive things, that have happened as a result of the establishment of the zone in the Mount Salem area. I want to thank the various agencies on behalf of those constituents who received birth certificates, NIS cards, TRNs, passports as part of the enhanced services provided through the zones. Mr. Speaker, moving to areas of general concern about road and infrastructure. Like everywhere else in the island, there are concerns about the lack of timely maintenance of the road network in various communities in St. James West Central, not unique to the constituency, but on behalf of those that I speak for. They have asked me to tell the government. The government, yes, the government. This is, I am giving it as they have given it to me. That while work is being done, and I have to highlight the Guava Walk community, Mr. Speaker, 45 years was the last time since any road was fixed in that community. And they say, thanks, the road has been fixed. Road work has been done in Unity Hall, another area which has not seen road work in quite a while. The Claridge Hall Road is now being rehabilitated. Pitford Garden, a small community, they say over 25 years, the road has never been fixed, but it has now been fixed, and they want to say thank you. We've also done work in Wales Pond and right across different areas of the constituency. But even with all of that work, Mr. Speaker, because so much was left undone for so long, it is but a drop in the bucket. And the constituents have asked me, Most Honourable Prime Minister, as a minister with responsibility for the agency of the, the agency responsible for works, that the quality of the road work needs to be looked at again. It is not the political directorate that fixed the road. We do have experts that are employed across the ministries, departments, and agencies. Many wonder what has gone so wrong that the standard has become so low for such a long time. For such a long time. The quality of the engineering is in question. The lack of proper drainage and other related work to ensure that when roads are fixed, they are able to deal with the weight of the traffic, the water, and everything else that goes with it. So, Mr. Speaker, I am merely speaking on behalf of those who put me here. They have asked me to say to the government, let us look again at standards, because it appears that within government we have normalized a level of substandardness, and the people have been shortchanged as a result. Mr. Speaker, I have listened to the other honourable members who have made their presentation, and I just wonder whether going forward in these debates, we could look at structuring them in such a way that the constituencies within a parish present their report at the same time. That way we can get an idea of what is happening on a parish-by-parish basis. I throw out the suggestion for due consideration. Mr. Speaker, I am still relatively new to this role of Member of Parliament in this House. I would like to suggest that at some stage we take a look at what properly constitutes the role of Member of Parliament. The closest clue we get to what it ought to be is a provision which says what the Parliament is supposed to do. And the Parliament is empowered to pass laws for peace, order, and good government. And there are numerous processes that go into the passing of laws, Mr. Speaker. And I believe that at some point we need to reconsider how we do the work of the Parliament. I say that, Mr. Speaker, out of discussion with different groups within my constituency. It is very diverse. It comprises all class, color, creed, and each expresses views, concerns, and makes suggestions. For some, the office of Member of Parliament is equated to that of a social worker. And the Member of Parliament is called upon to discharge functions which are properly vested in agents of the state. But for whatever reason, the people desire to be better served. And the Member of Parliament is the closest person to the state that they see. And you're being asked to be all things to all people. In the process, some shortchanging takes place. Mr. Speaker, we are a great nation. But the truth is that we have to find a way to work a little better, a little more efficiently, and a little more productively. I am grateful for the opportunity that the people of St. James West Central have given me to ensure that their concerns are taken into account when decisions are being made. Mr. Speaker, in addition to the concerns about infrastructure, the one thing I believe the constituents want me to echo on their behalf and is the issue of the crime and violence in the West. Crime and violence in the West. Mr. Speaker, it is bad. It is bad. And it knows no color. They are grateful that things are being done. But it appears, Mr. Speaker, that they are calling for more to be done. And I believe that the Honourable Minister who is prime among the ministers, in due course will respond. Mr. Speaker, I'm really mixed with emotions about what is happening in St. James. Very mixed. But the administration is committed to doing what it can. And I call on the people to play their part. And to the extent that they are listening, in particular, I am asking those who are carrying the guns to put them down. I am asking those who choose to settle their differences by taking lives to stop. As far as I go. May it so please you, Mr. Speaker.
Member, Mr. Redmond.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, as I stand to make another presentation in this honourable House, I want to thank God for this opportunity to be serving the people of Northeast St. Elizabeth and to be serving my country. I must express my deepest gratitude to my councillors, councillor caretaker, staff, constituency executive, and my constituents for their hard work and dedication to the constituency of Northeast St. Elizabeth. Mr. Speaker, I must thank those ministers who have been very helpful in assisting me in satisfying some of the needs of my constituents. Mr. Speaker, I am hopeful that those ministers who have made promises and have not yet fulfilled those promises will do so before the end of this financial year. Mr. Speaker, education is a high priority for myself and the constituents. This has been demonstrated through my contributions and involvement with schools, teachers, and students. Mr. Speaker, Northeast St. Elizabeth is proud that the Principal of the Year is from the St. Elizabeth Technical High School. The runner-up Principal of the Year is from the Aberdeen High School, and the Teacher of the Year is from the St. Elizabeth Technical High School. Mr. Speaker, I'm honored to recognize these professionals for their exceptional contribution to education. Mr. Speaker, last year I requested additional classroom for the Sydney Pagan STEM Academy, and I'm proud to announce that the school is the beneficiary of 18 additional classrooms for the academic year 2017-2018. Mr. Speaker, under my education program, significant funds was allocated for tuition assistance for needy university students. Mr. Speaker, I started a GSET award program under which 3 students from each school, totaling 54 awardees, received grant of $10,000 each, specifically to be used for back-to-school supplies. Mr. Speaker, I further recognize the need for students generally to receive some assistance based on needs. 1,200 students receive back-to-school supplies. Mr. Speaker, many schools receive assistance to maintain their physical plant and equipment. Some of these benefits were building materials, public address systems, multimedia projectors, and water tanks. Mr. Speaker, there is an overwhelming need to provide vocational training for our young people in the constituency. I'm therefore requesting the appropriate agencies to assist in establishing a training center in the Santa Cruz area to meet these needs. Mr. Speaker, the resurfacing of the Tombstone to Gutters Main Road is a welcome improvement for the constituents and the traveling public. As a part of this project, the sidewalk and drainage along Main Street in Santa Cruz have been rehabilitated. Through my HOPE allocations, sections of the Upper Aberdeen and Marlborough roads were patched, and sections of the sidewalk along Coke Drive in Santa Cruz was rehabilitated. Mr. Speaker, there still remains areas of critical need within the constituency. These include the resurfacing and drainage upgrade of Pagan and Institutional Drive in Santa Cruz. The town of Balaclava is in need of a proper drainage system and a fire brigade station. The Balaclava and Santa Cruz police stations are also in need of service vehicles. Mr. Speaker, due to the heavy rains, the roads have deteriorated. Drains are blocked, resulting in urgent need to carry out restoration work. Specifically, there is an urgent need for drain cleaning, debushing, and road patching across the entire constituency. $12 million, which have been recently granted, is just a drop in the bucket. It's my hope that additional funds can be made available to address these problems. Mr. Speaker, we have made progress in addressing some of our water issues. The water pipes in the Goshen area, specifically Church Road to Wilton, have been upgraded from 4-inch to 6-inch pipes. The Southampton well has been rehabilitated and 2 relief pumps were installed. Mr. Speaker, the following areas have major water problems: Marlborough, Roses Valley, Russell Hill, Phoenix Park, and Upper Aberdeen. These need urgent attention, and I'm appealing to the Honourable Minister with responsibility for water to assist in solving this problem. Mr. Speaker, Appleton Estate has embarked on an expansion of its rum tour operation. This involves investment of some $7.2 million US. This will provide additional employment directly and indirectly. As Member of Parliament, I must commend them for this investment, and I'm looking forward to continue working closely with them in achieving their goals. Mr. Speaker, there is an obvious need to improve housing across the constituency. Some of the conditions that constituents live under are basically inhumane. I have utilized my social housing allocation to help solve some of the problems. Clearly, the scope of the problem demands much greater investment. In this regard, I'm hereby requesting direct intervention by this government to effectively address this issue. Mr. Speaker, for over a decade, the overflowing of a septic pit has adversely affected workers at the Santa Cruz Police Station, the courthouse, and the Tax Administration Office. I'm happy to say that a new septic pit has been constructed. Further to that, a parking lot has been constructed on the compound, just minimizing parking on the roadway. Mr. Speaker, a pool was built on the grounds of the Santa Cruz Community Center, but was never operational. The pool has been renovated and is almost ready for use by the community and the educational institutions. Mr. Speaker, a contract has been awarded to rehabilitate the existing traffic signal at the intersection of Retirement Road and Main Street in Santa Cruz. This comes as welcome news in light of the fact that this intersection has been the scene of 9 recent accidents. Mr. Speaker, I have been working closely with National Energy Solution to ensure that all communities are supplied with electricity in the shortest possible time. I'm pleased to report that 2 communities, Pound Hill and Facey Town, are in the process of being supplied with electricity. Mr. Speaker, there is need for more street lights, particularly in remote communities, and also a need to service existing street lights. Mr. Speaker, the constituency is faced with a number of waste management challenges, one of which is irregular collection of garbage due to the fact that there is only one old unreliable truck. The truck is frequently out of service, which results in the accumulation of excess garbage for long periods. Mr. Speaker, Santa Cruz and Balaclava markets are in a deplorable condition and needs immediate attention. Mr. Speaker, predial larceny remains a major problem to the farmers within my constituency. A plan needs to be developed to fight predial larceny, as farmers are suffering great losses and in many cases have become demotivated. Mr. Speaker, through my CDF and the Production Incentive Program, farmers have been given assistance in the form of fertilizer, tools, chemical, chicken, and feed. Mr. Speaker, as I travel through my constituency, I am asked for assistance, and if my response is, I have no resources, the next question would be, what about your CDF? On this note, Mr. Speaker, the need for an increase in the CDF allocation cannot be overemphasized. Mr. Speaker, much has been accomplished, but my work has just begun. My accomplishments are humble beginnings towards fulfilling my goals and ambition of meeting the needs of all my constituents. The problems we face are complex, are not limited to physical boundaries of the constituency, or are they confined to the political leanings. In this spirit, I appeal to the government and the ministers to treat us fairly and justly so that we may be equal participants in the quest for poverty through equality, justice, and integrity for all. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, the presentation by the member from North East St. Elizabeth brings to an end this debate, which started about 6 weeks ago. Mr. Speaker, only 18 of the members participated, about 28%, 1/8 in the debate. And I think it shows, Mr. Speaker, that there has been little interest, largely because I believe members do feel that there is not much to it and that their voice really won't carry the sway that was intended. I think the government and the House leader in particular will have to review this debate, its timing, and its ability. It is indeed relevant, but members will not believe so if there is no interest shown by the government, and in particular in relation to the Ministry of Finance. Mr. Speaker, we are expecting a summation of the presentations, and that summation will be presented to the Ministry of Finance. And we're expecting that there will be some response to the various issues that have been raised, and in particular, those that affect the budget, which is to come 2018-2019. Mr. Speaker, there's just one point I wish to make, because it is clear that as members of Parliament, we are under constant pressure. And the pressure is there largely because there is a sense amongst the electors that we are not as effective as they would want us to be. And one of the reasons for that has to do with the fact that our agencies that are to collect garbage, that are to fix roads, etc., are found wanting. And so the only people that the citizens can reach are us. And hence the pressure, and hence the clamor from all of us to be given some more power, to get some of the things that are necessary to be done in our constituencies. Now, I know the views have been expressed elsewhere about our role and in relation specifically to resources. But until we are able to get the state agencies and the resources to satisfy all that demand, I think it's going to be a continued pressure, and the MPs are going to be unrelenting in wanting to see these things done and the resources provided. Mr. Speaker, I want to again suggest that for next year, with the full support of all of us, and in this regard, everybody is equal, that this debate be taken far more seriously than this year. And I want to commend those persons who have spoken and to move that this motion be approved by the House.
Those in favor? Aye. Those against? Ayes have it.
Mr. Speaker, it's not intended to any further business for the day. So I ask the House be adjourned until 1 o'clock tomorrow when we receive the report from the I ask the House be adjourned until 1 o'clock tomorrow when we receive the PAAC report. Notwithstanding the standing order, Mr. Speaker, I ask that the House be adjourned until 1 tomorrow to allow us to take the report from the PAAC.
The motion is that the House be adjourned until 1 p.m. tomorrow, December 6. Those in favor? Those against? Ayes have it.
I love to learn. I want to learn. Give me a good education